The Way, a three-part series, drama series on the BBC. The Daily Mail and the Telegraph are gloating that got the smallest audience ever for a BBC primetime drama. That's because it's about the left and it's rubbish. But, just under 1 million people watched it live on BBC. I reckon though quite a few people will have watched it like myself. I binge it on iPlayer. That's how people usually watch TV these days. I really enjoyed it, especially the first episode. It has many references to previous working class struggles, not just the miners' strike. And the Hollywood actor Michael Sheen has undergone quite the political transformation. Comrades might have known about this. He moved back to Wales. He's sold all of his possessions, well, most of them anyway, and he's getting quite involved in local campaigns. Bit of a Welsh nationalist too, which is understandable, and that finds reflection in this drama. There's also an interesting quote in there from the father, who's a bit of a collaborator, who says, "The British don't revolt; they grumble." Or do they? And that's quite an interesting theme that goes through this the way, because there's actually quite a lot of history of the British doing more than grumbling. Paul Jones has watched the 3 episodes for us, but I will first show the trailer a bit for comrades who haven't seen it yet. That gives a bit of a flavor.
Once upon a time, in a kingdom far, far away.
I just sick of feeling like we have no power.
People will get hurt. They always get hurt.
How bad does it have to get before we, leave?
Leave where? After all that?
The Driscolls, highest grade target.
Oh, Dad, come on! We're fugitives, fleeing from our homes on foot, no possessions. I won't let my family risk this. It's your alternative. Is this a dream?
You mean a nightmare?
Paul Jones, then, he's got problems with his camera, so we're just going to hear from him. You've rewatched it again. Is it required watching for Marxists?
Yes, I think it is, and I think the Daily Mail hate this story because it tells the tale of this Port Talbot uprising in the near future in a kind of imaginative and accessible way, and that reflects contemporary fracture point. It's a story about people coming together because they have to, even despite issues in within families and within communities, and there's references throughout to us having to learn to talk to each other, and that's reflected in the family and within some of the meetings that discuss the strike action, and how they're going to take on the what they fear is the closing down of the steelworks in Port Talbot. I think it's also interesting that we've got a program on television that uses the language of the labour movement, of socialism, something that wouldn't have been so out of place in the 1970s. Things like Play for Today, and this is something that's quite rare now. So I imagine it did give a few people a few sleepless nights. And as you said, like the director Michael Sheen, I think, is a native of Port Talbot. Probably you could describe him as a kind of Welsh Republican socialist. Is set in the near future, as I said, and it's has aspects of kind of magical realism interwoven with strong themes of that were very recognisable: social and industrial decline. I think actually the Daily Mail posed 697,000 views directly, as opposed to 2.3 million for Celebrity Big Brother. But as you said, iPlayer is one issue. But I do think we need to accept that we live in a depoliticized moment, and that's kind of reflected in the way there's lots of reference points to lots of references to we just want everything to get back to as they were, and and like a nostalgia for a time when people cared about us, which I thought was interesting. I mean, the story starts with one of the workers in the steelworks being, falling into the furnace and being burnt alive. And it's ironic, given the recent self-immolation of Aaron Bushnell, that it starts with the worker's father going into the high street and setting himself on fire. And this sort of sets in motion, the story as it unravels. One of the chief characters, Jeff Driscoll, and it follows the Driscoll family. He's a trade union steward, and he's the father of he's the son of a miner and someone involved in the miners' strike who kills himself after the defeat of the miners' strike. And I think this is a very strong theme throughout. You've got like Jeff is very clearly a defeated and a depressed and an alienated individual, both within his family and in terms of politically. There's a one part where his estranged wife Dee says in the meeting that discusses strike action, you practically used to be an anarchist, and look at you now. He's described within as a conciliator by the more radical chief steward. Owen, the chief character, who's his son, notes, "You don't do anything," and it kind of highlights his kind of decaying role as a union activist and as a father. You're seeing, and I think this is probably themes that are very recognizable to people who've come out of deindustrialization and who've lived across the last 4 decades. Another very interesting theme is like different aspects of mythology that are interwoven, and there's lots of like stuff that reflects Sheen's kind of Welsh nationalism. There's like this, he grabs hold of this sword, and which is chucked into the sea at the end, and it's kind of evokes kind of pan-Celtic Arthurian legend. Equally, there's lots of other sort of subtle reference points throughout. I don't know if you've noticed the Red Star Chinese takeaway, and there's an argument at a kid's birthday party where Dee faces off with one of her neighbours who pays homage to Thatcher, enabling her to buy her council house while she's talking about we need to do something because our children have got no future. So these kind of arguments that take place in working class communities is kind of given an airing throughout. Episode 1 sees the steelworks furnace flame going out, given sort of safety work completed by management. And again, there's local legends prophesizing doom for the locality should this happen. And this is something that is explored throughout. And in the meeting, we have interesting set of references. I think you mentioned it, Tina, to historical struggles of the Chartists, the Newport Rising, the General Strike, the 84, 85 miners' strike, and so on. And for a lot of us, watching, this will be, stuff that we all know about. Incidentally, there's an image in one of these images is the plaque in Newport of the Newport. Right, that's the one actually, which I think was criminally destroyed by local authority. It's a historic emblem. I think this happened about a few years ago. But anyway, we see, a successful strike ballot, and a kickoff takes place with an intersection of blockade, strike action, and self-organisation featuring. The whole series is quite interesting and how it's put together. The first episode in particular is very quickly paced, quite surreal in many respects. It's cut in with lots of CCTV imagery, lots of references to social media, even emojis sort of flying about. And it kind of provides link between, intergenerationally between like traditional forms of struggle supplemented by new technology, which, for us potentially allows movements to emerge quickly. However, we see in that the heavy response of the state, and in part of that, they turn off the internet. And in episode 3, this is identified as leading to a generalized glitch. And throughout, you've got TV images that sort of play on this like nostalgic feel. There's lots of clips that emerge from Carry On films, Dad's Army, Benny Hill, and so on, which is quite amusing. But the discussion flowing on from that notes how we create the online space by what we are upload, and we're just rehashing like the present from the past. And I desire for a more secure existence. I want things back the way they were, is said, and that's counterposed in discussion by us needing to imagine a different future, which I thought was interesting. The themes of class are obviously, I mean, there's a lot of themes to around Wales and so on, but the themes of class are unquestionable, and they both reflect Michael Sheen's politics and our own fractured moment. The issues explored, could just as easily refer to other ex-industrial areas in Britain or internationally. And I guess like Welsh nationalism, the feature of this, we see this in Scotland, and I've seen other comments, people talking about, oh, my grandparents were miners in Scotland, and they feature on the locality rather than class. I think that's interesting, and we just have to grapple with. Anyway, we see the riot, the strike, the march, and so on, and we see Dee, which is Jeff's estranged wife, giving passion speeches on the picket line, and Owen, the son, who's there, we can see his head in the middle, throws a bar in a kind of act of defiance. And he's someone he says, I like being numb. He's a drug addict. He talks about, I like being numb. He's on medication and so on. He kind of comes to life in this moment. Further themes of lockdown, internment camps, militarized and technological responses from the state are introduced. And it's all, very, very interesting.
Can I ask you a couple of questions, Paul? Because you mentioned there's lots of references I took notes and I almost couldn't stop taking notes, because you have the football stadium, they're being rounded up and put into a football stadium where they deterred. It's like Chile, isn't it, when they illegally arrested all these workers and socialists. You have, and I found almost the most moving one is Anna is the girlfriend of the main character. And, the family now has to flee. All the lots of Welsh people are trying to flee into England. And they're like, I can't believe we're refugees, but we're just normal people. And she says, this is going on everywhere in the world. There's so many refugees, and now you're one of them. I thought that was very moving, that how quickly things can turn around for normal people who suddenly become refugees.
Yes, of course. And it's quite interesting. Anna's in the pub at one point, and she's the only one who could go to the bar because she's Polish. And they as Welsh people can't have to keep their mouth shut. And there's one point where the son Rhys talks about they're in a corner shop, and he says diolch, which is I think thank you in Welsh, which gives the game away. I mean, some of it. It's there are some laboured points. It's and we could all be critical of we're spoon fed some of the themes, but it's very interesting, and it weaves in lots and lots and lots of information, issues, and kind of you've got Freemasons, you've got Dee's anglicised sister who lives with a very posh upper middle class family of and they escape to the south coast, and there's the makeshift refugee camp Newport Talbot, and the introduction of a character, the Welsh catcher, which I thought was I struggled with that bit a bit. It was a bit in between Doctor Who and the Mighty Boosh, but you've got this character, an ex-Iraq War mercenary, pragmatically just following orders.
Who's actually Welsh, as it turns out, isn't he?
He's Welsh, of course, which is interesting in of itself. But there's also reference points to the state being worried about copycat uprising. And then, of course, there's this thing about the Red Monk. And it's all kind of mythology in creation. And I think we should think about this. I mean, in the past, the Labour movement, had adjuncts of drama groups and all the rest of it who created stories that reflected working class subjectivity and so on. But of course, then you've got, and I'll finish soon. It's just I don't want to. I'm sure most people have seen the play, but we can explore some of these themes. But while crossing the channel, it's evokes the experience, as you said, of refugees coming into England, and we've got these people trying to get out. And the boat begins to sink and take on water, and Jeff, it has this kind of moment of transcendence in a sense. He's made peace with his kind of dead father, and this antagonism, political and personal antagonism between them, which is I think really interesting, is kind of resolved, as it is with the rest of his family. And at the beginning, he's a conciliator. He describes a scab at one point. He said, "I've never felt so connected," and he's talking about his family. But I mean, this goes beyond that. His kind of consciousness is being raised in that moment.
You notice, by the way, that they don't say scabs; they say outside labour, which I thought was interesting.
No. There's a bit where he gets to Newport Talbot where the chief steward finds that he's given notes to management and stuff, and he calls him a scab, I think, at one point.
At that point, okay. But when the actual strike breakers,
there's there's other issues of the strike breakers being brought in, and Thea, the daughter, who's also in the police, having to face off against her family. And that's an interesting, dilemma for her. And the only way she can resolve that is through, doing a Thelma and Louise thing, getting hold of the police van and, taking them off to the south coast.
Yeah, so it was interesting that they used private policing, didn't they, or a private company to police
or something, I think they were called. And they're interesting. They're all very hyped up as well. And there's obviously lots of reference points to the miners' strike throughout. I think some of the identification of the role of women, again, is quite interesting. And again, probably speaks to the experience of the women's support movement during the miners' strike.
But what was interesting about the policing, I think during the miners' strike, they made a point of not using local police, didn't they? Because these communities, they knew each other, and you actually saw that happening. They didn't do that in this one, where the daughter has to arrest her brother, etc., and they try to avoid all of that because often the police then would go over to the strikers.
Yes, and I think in those communities, there would have been lots of that. Wouldn't have been uncommon. People who had members of people join the police as well as having minors and one in the family. So I think sometimes. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, can I ask you one thing? And one theme you mentioned is the looking back. I thought that was slightly labored. We want to just things go back to normal, and at the end he's got the young man who he's trying to go back to fight, but you do wonder what is he fighting for, or what is his kind of vision, and that perhaps reflects somebody like Michael Sheen, who's very angry with the state of the world, but I don't think he's a socialist. He's clearly got no idea where to go or what to do. So it's all like a reaction against something without an idea of where to go beyond. We need to fight back. Yeah, but what are you
Yes.
fighting for?
I think he's obviously been privy to um, working class history, to aspects of the socialist tradition, which a younger generation probably are less familiar with, and it's kind of it's interesting. You've got this like the guy the Jeff's father who's been in the miners' strike, militant, and all the rest of it, very much part of the upswing of organised labour in the 1970s, and the defeat of that generation. Jeff's probably my age, mid 50s and so on, and the generation oncoming are kind of having to relearn some of these themes and practices, because they have to, which I think is interesting. I mean, stylistically, as I said, there are definitely limitations in this. Much of it's forced, but the logic of it, I think, is that we need to act and be successful and struggle. And it's that intergenerational thing I thought was quite tenderly done, as well as it's very entertaining in parts, and there are a few laughs. It's not laboured, it's not art house or what have you.
No.
And there's references to getting out of Hell Island, which I thought was interesting.
If anybody would like to come in actually and ask a question or make a contribution on this subject or any of the subjects we've discussed tonight, please click raise hand, which is at the bottom of your screen, and I'll bring you in. Paul, you've got your hand up, Paul Fleurs, but I think that's possibly a mistake. If you do want to speak, you have to allow me to make you into a panelist. So please accept that. So what I found a bit strange about some of this as well is at the beginning it shows, this strike kicks off everybody's grievances basically, and you've got the fascists coming, and you've got sort of neo-Nazis coming, and people giving speeches against foreigners and stuff. That I thought that was a bit labored, and they're dividing up the area into, that I think that reflected a little bit perhaps a lack of a political direction of the production team. What did you think?
Yeah, sorry, is this to me or to Paul?
Yeah, sorry, to you, Paul.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think so. I mean, and that may well, to us, it's probably. I don't think you get that huge variety of political tendencies existing in some of these areas, whereas you might get something like that happen in London or Manchester, perhaps. But I think still it sort of reflected like tensions and different ways that people can gravitate, different ways in which people can gravitate. It's not, we don't all, automatically become organized communists or Marxists, and we don't, the process of building a party and building industrially, politically, culturally isn't something that just comes through heroic actions, informal networks, as useful as they are, and our job, if you like, is to build on these struggles, to learn from them, to generalize, to locate them within a movement for socialist transition. And I think that's part of what we're doing here with the Communist Culture Club. And the cultural aspect is as important in some respects as organising at work, or being involved in political education, political action, and so on.
Absolutely.
Maybe that will come in the next episode, the next series. Who knows?
Indeed, thank you. We've got a couple of people who want to speak on this. Ian?
Just a brief thing. It's about the whole notion of tendentious art, really. I mean, sometimes when you sit through a Ken Loach film and you're subjected to, an hour and a half, 2 hours of unmitigated gloom preached to people who already made their minds up anyway, it's just dire, really. I can't abide it. And I watched this series, and I actually enjoyed it. I really did, and I thought it was good that Sheen made it and all the rest of it. But it's always a problem, isn't it, when you're trying to get something across politically using art. That sometimes it can fail because people just switch off completely. And yet, on the other hand, it can be a sort of a real spark in a way. I mean, at the simplest level, the drama about the postmasters travail, most of it, has really kind of stirred people up, and people could, people have known for ages that these poor people were treated mercilessly by the post office, and now all of a sudden, even politicians have to take notice. And from that point of view, art can be brilliant in terms of giving a voice that wasn't there. But when it gets all sort of preachy and it can just sort of be tiresome, really, and no one's. That's why, in a way, I'd much prefer looking at the classics and Shakespeare, because they engage with things which go across the centuries, really. They remain fundamentally human concerns. And of course, the political context is extremely important, but it's not. But that's different from agitprop type stuff. And the funny thing is that when you look at the Russian Revolution and the Bolsheviks and prolet cult, for example, prolet cult started off with fairly admirable intentions of bringing culture to working people who wouldn't have otherwise had an opportunity. So sticking a cinema on a train, for example, and taking it out some remote area was a wonderful thing to do. But of course, what you end up with if it's not about men in grubby shirts toiling and and overcoming things and whatever, then it's somehow not working class art. That's the sort of thing that irritates me beyond belief, I suppose. Not that there haven't been some good stuff. I mean, but it's that to just kind of sit through it and oh God, and again another dreadful poem by someone, and there was a little bit of that in the series, wasn't there? Something a little bit tendentious about the whole thing, but notwithstanding it, I thought it was an excellent series.
So you're doing introduction on Ken Loach films, yeah? Or Ken?
I'd rather stick pins in my eyes.
Whoa, gosh. It's on charity with Ken Loach. So
there's some great Ken Loach films.
Kes is great because it's not very it's actually not overtly political. Kes is a wonderful film. Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I think also something like Leeds United, to the TV stuff that Loach and Tony Garnett did was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think the interesting that it seems, coming out of this thing the way, which unfortunately I haven't seen, is actually that loss. There's a loss of experience. When you go back to the miners' strike, I mean, I was in Coventry during the miners' strike. All the people I fought the miners' strike with, for a year on the street, had all been through Saltley Gate. Had all been, and there was that tradition, militant trade unionism. I mean, the people had been on strikes. You had a cadre of shop stewards who knew what it was to lead a strike, and in many cases succeeded strikes, throughout the whole 20, 30 years. And you had that sort of, that experience. And now, of course, you go back to the strikes we've just been through. You can see it's completely gone. It's completely gone. There isn't that experience, unfortunately, And there isn't also. I mean, the other thing, of course, is that what that whole period, going through from the 50s really through the 60s, 70s, 80s, is it actually nourished the left, because the left itself, in terms of its cadre and its organisations, is of course organically linked to the movement of the working class itself. I mean, however, whatever political level and however imperfect and so on, we can make all these criticisms, but that exists, and the fact that there's now been these 20 years or a quarter of a century in which there's been barely any working class movement, movement among the organised working class until very recently. The occasional upsurge really has taken out, any kind of political, the political understanding of people. You can see that also. There's enormous confusion, enormous political confusion, because actually, all that sort of activity and the existence of political organisations actually gives some political clarity, even beyond purely the membership. The fact that people are constantly putting out, this view of the world, from the left, that penetrates. And of course, the fact that hasn't happened is enormous confusion. So, even if you sort of go and see what the far right say, it's all over the shop. Really is crazy stuff. They come out with, we had fascists singing about Joe Hill the other week. You said, bloody hell, what the hell are you? But it's that, it's that real confusion. And George Galloway spending his time cavorting with said fascists. So you can see that huge confusion that flows from that, in lots of places, precisely because you haven't got tradition of the organised working class, and you haven't then therefore also got the left actually putting forward politics that penetrate into the wider working class.
Absolutely, and our series is a little attempt to try and change that and start talking about culture, but also building up our culture.